Hi there, it's Steve, and welcome back to the Alcohol-Free Revolution podcast. Before we dive in, a huge shout out to everyone who's joined our brand new alcohol-free community that launched just a couple of weeks ago. Honestly, the energy, the honesty and the support, it's already becoming really something truly special, and we're absolutely buzzing with how it's taken off. But we've got more coming. Starting next week, we'll be adding a Wednesday evening slot to give you that midweek lift and to place you into a room and connect with people that are all at different stages in their alcohol-free adventure. If you'd like to join us, just email me the word interested to info@thealcoholfreerevolution.co.uk and we'll fire you over all the details that you need to get on board. Let's get into today's episode.
Welcome back to the Alcohol-Free Revolution podcast. I'm James Lloyd.
And I'm Steve Smith.
And we're both alcohol-free performance coaches. We've been alcohol-free for over 4 years, and this podcast is all about embracing alcohol-free lifestyle, celebrating it in a positive way, and helping people who are maybe sober curious continue that journey towards maybe taking a break or addressing their relationship with alcohol, if that's something that you want to do. But, you know, we're also all about speaking about alcohol-free, all of the benefits, and really coming at it from a point of view of building a community. So as many regular listeners to the show will know, we're all about positivity. We're all about celebrating the benefits of an alcohol-free lifestyle. But this week, we're going to shift gears slightly into a slightly more serious topic. We're going to speak about something that's very personal to Steve and I, and that's cancer. What we want to talk about more specifically is a lot of the lack of awareness around the very clear links between alcohol and cancer. And this week, we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Emma Davies. Emma's an associate professor in psychology at Oxford Brookes University. She's published many research papers and articles on a range of alcohol-related topics, and she's widely recognised as a leading expert in the field. Emma, welcome to the Alcohol-Free Revolution podcast.
Welcome along, Emma.
Thank you both for having me. It's great to be here.
So we've been looking forward to doing this one for a while because, like I say, you know, we're all about positivity on this podcast, but we want to talk a little bit more about some of the negative sides that go alongside alcohol and that lack of awareness piece. But before we get into that, and before we get into some of the big topics, perhaps you could just share a little bit about your background and how you came to be doing the great work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much, James. Yeah, so I'm, as you say, I'm a researcher at Oxford Brookes, and I've been doing research into alcohol for about 15 years now, I think, if I'm guessing correctly. But so, yeah, I've done research into a variety of different things that affect our cognitions, our behaviour and our feelings around alcohol. But I got into this topic area because I was just fascinated by how we make sense of health information, risk information, and how we kind of live our daily lives, knowing that some of the things we do aren't so healthy for us, and yet we do them anyway. So that's kind of basically where it came from, if that's helpful.
I think probably a good place to start would be talking about the World Health Organization and their view on alcohol. We've spoken about it once or twice on the pod before, but it's something whenever we kind of talk about it, generally surprises people that how alcohol is classified by the World Health Organization. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so actually the International Agency for Research on Cancer was the group that classified alcohol as carcinogenic, and that was back in, I did have to look this up for you, but it was 1988.
1988,
yeah. Yeah, so the World Health Organization's information about alcohol and some of the risks is kind of informed by that classification and all of the other data that they collect around the world. And of course, as you know, they're stating things like there's no safe limit for certain health conditions. And there's a huge variety of health conditions that are impacted by cancer, absolutely huge number. But the one you want to talk about today is cancer. So that information about cancer being carcinogenic has been around for a long time. And there's now causal evidence to show that alcohol is linked to 7 different types of cancers. So that's a variety of cancers of the head and neck, some of them colorectal cancer, liver cancer, and also female breast cancer as well. There is evidence building towards there being links between other cancers as well, but at the moment, that's what the World Health Organization evidence is telling us, among other health conditions that are also really important for us to consider. In particular, things like heart disease, which is also a really important condition that's impacted by alcohol, but is actually not well known to be the case. When we ask people, what does alcohol do to your health? People often say, oh, it's the liver. It's the liver. And that's the thing we're all really comfortable with. It's the liver. My liver's fine. And we don't tend to be as aware of some of the other health impacts, particularly that link between alcohol and cancer, which, as I say, is well established. And those pieces of evidence that show that link are really good pieces of evidence. So, for example, the World Health Organization and other bodies wouldn't be giving that advice unless the evidence was really, really strong. So we can be trustful of that evidence.
The statistic that kind of jumps out to me there is 1988, and the fact that we've been aware of this since 1988, and it's been so slow in coming, and we're all about it, as we say, it's all about awareness really here. It's not about banging the drum and saying this is bad, but why do we feel it's been so slow and so few people understand that has been the case since 1988? So it's basically falls into the same category as a group 1 carcinogen alongside tobacco, radiation, and asbestos. That's the one I was looking for. Thanks, Joe.
I'm laughing at it.
It's been very, very slow to come into the public domain. That baffles me.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't really know the full answer to it, but we've done some research looking at people's awareness around the links between alcohol and cancer. Specifically, we've done a study looking at women's awareness of the link between alcohol and female breast cancer, because breast cancer is one of the most commonly diagnosed cancers across the world and in the UK. And 1 in 7 women will get breast cancer in their lifetime. So in terms of alcohol, it's thought that about 10% or up to 10% of cases in the UK, at least, might be linked with alcohol consumption. Now, I just want to say that doesn't mean if you drink, you caused your breast cancer. That's not what we're saying at all, because the type of research that gives us these links and gives us this evidence are these big studies looking at huge numbers of people over time, so tracking their health information, tracking their behaviour, and it gives us a kind of estimate of those numbers of cases. So we can't point the finger, and we should never obviously do that when it comes to cancer. Which is really important for us to emphasize, but we do see these links. So why don't we know more about that? So we explored that, particularly with women, particularly around breast cancer, because it's such a common cancer. And if we could reduce cases of breast cancer, that would be so impactful for people's lives. And of course, not to mention savings to the health service and all of that. So we embarked on this study funded by a fantastic charity called Prevent Breast Cancer. And we basically explored this with women who'd had a diagnosis of breast cancer, women who had been drinking above what we might call low risk limits. We can talk about that another time if you want. And kind of asked them. And the women who'd had breast cancer were absolutely outraged that they hadn't known this information. Like absolutely outraged. Like, if they've gone through a hugely life-changing experience, which people go through when they're diagnosed with cancer, as you know. And they were just outraged. There was something potentially that could have impacted that they didn't know about. So they were, right, we've got to make people aware of this. They wanted hard-hitting messaging. They wanted everyone to know. And the women who hadn't had an experience of breast cancer, who were drinking alcohol, were saying, well, yeah, okay, maybe this is a risk, but I don't think it's going to happen to me. There's loads of risks in life. So, why add to one more, and particularly because we're working with midlife women, midlife women face a range of different challenges, as you know. And they say, I just don't want another thing that blames me for things. So there's this sort of tension. That's not quite answering your question, which is why don't we know? But some of the explanations that we've seen about why we don't know is, one thing is we don't see that much health information about alcohol anyway. And you pick up a bottle, don't drink when pregnant. Brilliant. That only applies to a small number of people. Crack on. Or drink responsibly, which is another topic we could talk about. But I'm absolutely responsible. I'm not like those people on a street corner, or I'm not like those young people being rowdy at night. So I'm responsible. So I'm doing all the things I should be doing. So we don't see I don't think we've seen any in memory to me, health campaigns that really focus on that link. Alcohol policy in the UK, we've not had a new policy since 2012. And to me, sometimes I think that's not that long ago, but it really is.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. We've got to think about that, even if we wish it wasn't. So there's no kind of joined up effort to communicate that information out there. Alcohol information on the NHS, there's not a lot out there. There's not a lot of tailored advice. And of course, the alcohol industry, not keen on spreading the word about lots of those health risks. So those are some of the reasons, I think.
Yeah, there's an awful lot in there. We'll come back to. I think one of the things that's just sticking with breast cancer for a moment. One of the things that really shocks me is that even when women have had breast cancer, they've had a diagnosis and they've had treatment, I don't think it's commonplace to actually tell women, after, you know, by the way, you perhaps should be aware of the links between alcohol and cancer, because, you know, people just don't know. You think at least people would be told after the event that this is probably something you maybe want to reconsider doing. It's not about blame or anything, but again, it's about giving people that information. But that doesn't seem to happen either.
No, actually, we've also done a study with women who've had breast cancer about their health behaviours and what advice they were given by health professionals. Actually, the advice is that if you've had breast cancer, you should stick to no more than 5 units of alcohol a week. I don't know how widespread that knowledge is, or how much it's communicated, but women told us that when they'd finished their treatment, for example, or they'd gone to see their clinician, they were being given things like, "Oh, you've got the all clear. Go home and open a bottle of champagne."
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Or,
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking.
or relax and enjoy yourself. Have a few drinks. What we know about the link between alcohol and breast cancer is actually probably the risks build up over time. So it's drinking through the lifetime building up to the diagnosis. That's where the really strong evidence is. Now, there is a little bit of a need for some more solid evidence about the link between alcohol and breast cancer recurrence. But the signs are that alcohol is something that could lead to recurrence of cancer. There is some kind of debate in the literature around that, the scientific literature, I will say. But what we do know is that kind of having a kind of healthy lifestyle post-cancer diagnosis can really improve someone's quality of life. And that includes, and that's not just alcohol, of course, that includes being active, having a healthy diet and things like that as well. But yeah, it's just striking how the women were telling us that the health professionals were essentially encouraging them to go away and crack on and live as you lived before in terms of alcohol. And now for some women, breast cancer and the cancer diagnosis is a kind of moment of change. It forces a reevaluation, of course. But for people who were drinking perhaps a bit more than was potentially than they wanted to, so perhaps they were feeling some signs of dependence, or who were drinking heavily in social situations beforehand, their habitual behaviour, to be told, yes, crack on and go back to your previous behaviours, was like a sort of permission, if you like. Whereas if they'd been given advice that perhaps it wasn't going to be helpful, they've said to us they would have listened to it.
Well, you follow your doctor's advice, right? That's what people do. They look to doctors to give them the right information.
Yeah, and you touching upon that just a second ago when you're mentioning about the Drink Aware campaign, and we just go to there's that picture of the pregnant lady on the side of the bottle, and that's the one we immediately we jump to that. And I think it is that raising awareness side of things. And as you said, there's we take risks every day in everything we do, whether that's smoking, drinking, or anything else, activities that we do, and it just comes down to that awareness. And obviously, my understanding is that Ireland is bringing in labelling on bottles to address, or that it's something that's been getting discussed for a little while now. Whether that's going ahead or not, I'm not sure. But are we moving that way, do you feel, in England now? Is that something that's coming?
Labelling, do you mean?
Yeah. Well, what's the answer there?
So, yeah, interesting that you raised that. So in the NHS 10-year health plan, there's a couple of things that the health plan says about alcohol. And one of them is, we're going to do some labelling. So maybe we are going in that direction. And I'm certainly not against the use of information on product labels. I think having more information is a great idea. But what we do know from years and years of research on alcohol product labelling, whether or not it would change behaviour, is that it probably wouldn't change behaviour. It would increase people's awareness. And as I say, that's a good thing. But we all know that knowing something isn't the same as doing something. Now, it's interesting that has appeared in the NHS 10-year health plan, and that many countries are trying to push that forward, because I think it seems like one of those policies where we can say, oh, yeah, we've done something about alcohol. Brilliant. Tick. And the alcohol industry know a lot of the research. They're very much on top of this, and they know the evidence suggests that it's unlikely to lead to big changes in behaviour. Other than there was one fantastic study done in Canada that you might have heard about, which involved putting cancer labels on products in the kind of I can't remember how it quite works, but sort of more government run off license type approaches in different cities, and having really big cancer warnings on labels did reduce the sales in those shops. So the industry were like, no, let's not do this anymore. So other than that, though, experimental studies we've done in the UK, worldwide studies that I've been involved in, show that we don't think there would be an impact on behaviour. So, you know, it's going to be a nice thing to say we did something in the NHS 10-year health plan for alcohol, but
when you compare alcohol and cigarettes, and going back to what you mentioned at the very beginning, Emma, when we talked about the World Health Organization, cigarettes and alcohol both sit in that bracket of class 1 carcinogens. I'm not saying I don't know if they have exactly the same impact on, you know, on cancer risk. Maybe smoking's higher. I don't know. But if you ask anyone in the street, is smoking linked to cancer? Is it going to cause cancer? Then, you know, surely 95% of people are going to go, yeah, I know that. But there was some research published, I think, by Alcohol Change UK a year ago, that I think it was something like about 13% of people knew that about alcohol. So whether or not labeling changes behaviour, it certainly, like you say, would raise awareness, and that way people have
a choice.
They have a choice. They have, you know, no one is saying you shouldn't drink, you can't drink, we should ban alcohol. It's about giving people the information so they know, you know, do what you will, but know what you do. You know, and I just think it's such a sleight of hand, I think, with this. And you mentioned the alcohol industry there and lobbying, and it just feels kind of quite insidious, I think. That does seem to be that it's being blocked by the alcohol industry for obvious reasons. What's your view on that?
Well, I think if we come back to the idea of smoking and this kind of, I think it's very commonplace for people to say, yeah, smoking's bad. Smoking does this, that, and the other. A lot of the studies are unequivocal about links between smoking and a range of conditions. But it's not just labeling and information about smoking that changed smoking behaviours. There's been a huge package of more broader legislative things, for example, in the smoking ban in 2007, which was hugely impactful.
That seemed like a pivotal moment, didn't it?
It's a pivotal moment, and it has impacted on people's health. But that is a brave, broad public health measure at the legislative level, right? Alongside all of these other measures, such as better information, better education, more awareness of the risks, cultural changes around the acceptability of smoking in different contexts. So we don't have those things with alcohol. So if we rely on this idea of labeling, we can talk about the NOLO thing in a minute, which is another interesting point. But so if we rely on just that measure alone, we're not going to see those big impactful changes that we've seen with smoking. What we've seen, and I think probably you mentioned Alcohol Change and Institute of Alcohol Studies and all these other organisations, if you look at their response to the NHS 10-year health plan, is it's disappointment, because we know there are some really big measures that would have a huge impact on alcohol consumption in the UK. I mean, minimum unit pricing, for one, would target some of the most dependent drinkers, but all sorts of other things like restrictions of sales and so forth. Those things would be really helpful, but they're not present in the plans at the moment. So I think you need a package of measures alongside raising awareness in order for it to have that impact.
I think with smoking as well, I mean, sheer pricing as well, I think, as obviously, you know, I've never been a smoker, but I kind of look at the price of cigarettes nowadays and I wonder how people continue a habit like that. But obviously, you know, like you say, so the smoking ban in 2007, but there was the knock-on effect of the passive smoking and everything else. So that's obviously was far easier to implement. And so it is just about raising that awareness, and it is just how do we get there is the question. But are there any countries that are doing it well versus that we kind of look up to, so to speak?
A really good question. There are places where there are different drinking cultures, for sure. You might look at sort of like Northern Europe as having a kind of particularly kind of wet culture around beers, spirits, and then you might contrast other countries. But overall, I don't think anyone's got it perfectly right. There are different legislations in different jurisdictions. There are different kind of marketing factors at play. I don't think that anyone's got it nailed just yet.
And are you confident these measures in the NHS 10-year plan are gonna happen? Because at the moment it's just on paper, right? It's just been presented. Nothing's actually happened yet.
But to take the labelling point, first of all, when the alcohol guidelines around low risk drinking changed in 2016, so that does make me feel like it was a while ago now. It took a long time for alcohol producers to change the unit guidance on labels. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think it probably takes that much to design a new label for something. I think that's probably quite a fast process when you're in the marketing world. So there was a big, I can't remember the full details of it now, but there was a big kind of investigation into it. Like, well, how come people haven't done this? Like, we need time to make changes. You can bring out new products like that. Anyway, so to the labeling point, I think if it does come in, there'll be all sorts of blocks put on it. Think about when minimum unit pricing was being brought in, and in Scotland, and the response of the Scottish Whisky Association, things like that. So they'll do their best, but at the end of the day, they know it's not going to be massively impactful on people's behaviour. So we might see something. I don't know whether we'll see alcohol causes cancer in massive words on the side of a bottle, but we might see something. But the other point in the 10-year plan, if we can talk to that, is this expression, and I looked up the wording of it yesterday. We'll be working with and encouraging producers to do more in the no and low market. Now, that's another really interesting thing, and now that is happening, and I'm sure you're all over it with your community. Yeah, absolutely, and we know that's been happening, and we absolutely know it has been a game changer for people in terms of helping people change their alcohol consumption. So it's already happening, and of course we know market forces, people are running along to join that revolution, if you like. I had a lovely 0% Spanish lager last night, for example. I thought I would never have thought that I would drink these products, but is that going to be impactful? I think it's a really interesting one. There's evidence from loads of studies, and we've been doing our own very specifically around midlife women, to show that there are potentially like socioeconomic differences in whether people find these products helpful or find them acceptable in the first place. So there could be a case that this type of policy, if it's supported, it could reinforce or widen already existing health inequalities relating to alcohol, because we know that alcohol harm falls more severely on people who are less well off. So it's potentially, there's that issue, and I think there's loads of studies backing that up now. There's also some questions around this kind of dual branding approach with
alibi marketing.
Alibi marketing or surrogate marketing, I've heard it called as well. We've just published a paper that speaks to that, actually, with some colleagues at Oxford University. We did a experiment in a kind of online kind of experimental supermarket where people were watching adverts, either for an alcohol product and the no-low equivalent, or kind of a control advert, and then they were given a task of doing a shop for a barbecue, like a sort of experimental task, and they asked them some questions afterwards. We didn't find any conclusive evidence that the advertising was making people, the no-low advertising was making people, do more drinking. But what we did find is that people who saw those alcohol-free adverts, most of them, I think it's more than half, mistakenly thought they'd seen an advert for the alcohol product when we asked them afterwards. So they're kind of that mixed branding approach. It's going to reinforce that brand recognition that people have got and that kind of brand loyalty, and it has the potential, of course, to influence their behavior. So there is some things to unpick, I would say,
it's conflicting,
around
isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely conflicted, because I've spoken to so many midlife women in the last couple of years, and then very recently midlife men in a study we've been doing, about how helpful it's been. But I don't think it's across the population. So we've spoken to a number of different socioeconomic groups, and what we find in the groups that are kind of less well off, less affluent, if you like, is that these products are just seen as pointless. Like, why, if you go like I think the non-alcoholic lager that I had was like 10p cheaper than the alcohol lager last night, and I was like, fine, but it's still quite a lot of money for something, and people are saying, well, what's the point of it? I'm not getting anything from it. And then heavier drinkers that we speak to say it just makes them crave having the full strength product. So it completely depends on the person as to how useful it's going to be.
There's a lot in there.
I think, yeah,
Can't see.
it's I think it's that cultural change coming through, isn't there? We often reference alcohol-free beers and the fact that had we decided to go alcohol-free 10 years ago, the selection would have been a dusty warm bottle off the back shelf, whereas now the supermarket aisles are full of it. And equally, it didn't take them very long to change their labels there either, when they knew that they had to keep up with the growing market. So it can be done. It's just the choice of which label they have to change, I suppose. But I guess, and something we've often talked about as well, is the younger population now are tending not to drink at the levels. You may correct us here, but we've often discussed that typically they're drinking less than our age group. And we're possibly trying to change habits deeper I'm 52 and James is not far behind me. So trying to change those habits which are embedded. So if those labels were to change, I guess with our age group, you're trying to change habits, where with the younger people coming through, you're instilling a bit more awareness, and hopefully that will start to shift over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. There is some cultural change. I wouldn't get really excited about a younger generation, though, or as excited as everyone's getting. What we see is that there are definitely more people who choose not to drink. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, but it's not as huge as it's made out to be in the media.
Oh, go on, tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I haven't got all the figures in front of me, but I was looking at some figures the other day from a student survey. So it's an alcohol and other drug survey, looking at trends in what students were thinking about alcohol culture. And there was a bit of a dip a few years ago, but it seems to be going back up again, that students are more likely to agree to the statement that alcohol is an important part of university life. I can't remember the exact figures, but it's back up to sort of 85%. I can dig it out for you. But there's been a bit of a shift. So there are definitely, and I notice it here at Brookes in the student union, they have these really great initiatives that are alcohol-free socializing opportunities for students. But there's also still a really big heavy drinking culture, especially around sports teams and the Wednesday night. So I was coming back from my little alcohol-free lager night last night on the bus, and they're all out on the main road here, near to the university, doing their fancy dress Wednesday night things. And I think, and again, I'm not solid on the figures of this, but I think there has been a bit more of an uptick again in young people's drinking. I don't think it's going to be how it was. I'm not too far behind you in age, when we were younger, but there will be different cultural changes and different groups and different options. Like you say, options is important, but I think just saying, "Oh, the young people are fine," it's just it's not that I'm criticizing you saying that, but I think it sort of allows us to say, "Oh, there's some things are fine, so we don't need to concentrate on them as a society, as a health service, as researchers." And it allows us to be like, well, let's park that. Let's not worry. We don't need to really change too much in the alcohol policy, because these middle-aged people, they'll be gone soon, and the younger generation are fine. Crack on, So that's just my little caveat for that. Sorry.
That's really interesting to know, actually, because I've not really heard that too much. I'll be honest, that's quite disappointing to hear. But it's I'd rather have the facts for sure, because I certainly thought that alcohol was going down quite a lot in younger people, and certainly a lot of people I speak to have got teenagers or kids at university age. A lot of people say, my kids aren't bothered, they're not it's not really their thing anymore. Just wanted to go back to the point you mentioned there about alcohol-free alternatives and what's the point? What am I getting? It's only 10p cheaper and all that kind of thing. One of the things that we talk a lot about with clients in coaching is this idea that you can still keep the ritual of drinking. You can get home, open the fridge, have a beer or pop a glass of wine. You can still socialize with people and have an adult drink in your hand. And that's where I think the real value is. I mean, Steve and I both drink alcohol-free beer every night and love it. It's a great replacement. But it's, I think sometimes people miss the point around, I used to look at alcohol-free beer the same way I looked at decaf coffee. I'd be like, well, why would I bother? There's no buzz. What's the point? But now I drink decaf coffee every night because I started drinking non-alcoholic beer. So it's a replacement, and it allows you, because obviously when people aren't drinking, certainly at the beginning, they feel a little bit disconnected, and you stood there with a warm orange juice or a Diet Coke or whatever, and it's just not the same. And alcohol-free alternatives allow you to do that. They certainly create the appearance that you're part of the group, and it helps people get used to going alcohol-free or taking a break. And I think that's the value in it. Aside from the fact that they are really great products, because like as Steve said, you'll probably remember Caliber and all these days and Beck's Blue and all that kind of thing. I mean, it's horrendous. Now you sport for choice. I mean, there's so much to choose from, and that's absolutely wonderful. So I think that it's testament to the quality of the products. And we've done a few episodes in the past with various people. We had David from Zeno Wine on, and that product's fantastic. I'm not sort of plugging it or anything, but there's so many great products out there, alcohol-free alternatives now, that why wouldn't you?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely agree with what you're saying. I think it's a game changer. But I think it really depends on people's reasons for drinking in the first place. And I'm sure you probably talk about that a lot with your clients, and we talk about that a lot with people because we're trying to develop tools to support people to try and cut down. So for people who are kind of really habitual social drinkers, no low products, brilliant. For people who are kind of just reevaluating their health in general, also brilliant. But for people who are drinking to cope with quite tricky stuff, for example, with women we speak to, there's a lot of interaction between alcohol consumption and trauma. Drinking to cope, there being not that many other outlets in terms of being able to find things to deal with those troubles. It's not giving that enough hit. So you need to be helping people to deal with those underlying drinking motives alongside provision of those products as well. Otherwise, they're just going to fall by the wayside because they're not getting what they actually need from that. But I think the ritual element that comes out is really important for women in our work as well, particularly women who are juggling kids and older parents, that sort of sandwich generation. It's like you need to mark that time that's for you in some way. So for a lot of people, it's like, at the end of the day, kids are in bed, you've dealt with what needs to be dealt with, you sit down, finally it's your time. It can really help to mark that occasion, like you say, that ritual. But I think we're concerned with that sort of it being a coverall solution, and the real need to understand what's going on behind that person's reasons for drinking is absolutely vital. As this market opens up, then not to kind of say, well, that's great, we've sorted alcohol, let's just crack on.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there, isn't there? Of course, alcohol-free alternatives aren't going to, help people unwind and relax at the end of the day. But I think if you're using alcohol to relax, in a way, you're using it to remove withdrawal from the previous drinking, isn't it? If you're having, emotional problems and you're using alcohol to help with that. A lot of the time it's the alcohol that's making those problems worse, and it's getting out of that cycle of switching your brain off, and then the next day it starts all over again, and then you feel the withdrawal, so you have the drink, and then great, I feel relaxed now, but it's relaxing you from the stress that it put there in the first place. So it's kind of, whereas alcohol-free alternatives are obviously completely separate to that. But one thing I just wanted to sort of segue into, obviously we've talked a little bit about breast cancer, but I think one of the areas as well, which I'm often quite surprised about, a real lack of awareness, is alcohol and menopause. I think, it kind of crosses over into what you're saying there about relaxing at the end of the day and de-stressing. And certainly for a lot of women in midlife, it's a way of coping with the symptoms of menopause. But as I understand it, a lot of the time it's making them worse. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we've done some research looking at some of the interactions between alcohol consumption, menopause symptoms, and mental health quite recently. And then unsurprisingly and completely in line with what you're saying, people who are really suffering with symptoms and drinking to cope were actually feeling worse as a result. Some of that could be bi-directional. They weren't feeling too good in the first place, and therefore they're drinking, and that's exacerbating the symptoms. So we don't know from the research we've done so far. But yeah, absolutely. So hormonal changes completely change the way that we process alcohol. but also everything else as well. So if you're living in a life that has a number of different stressors, those things can feel exacerbated just due to trying to cope with hormonal changes at the same time as well. So lots of women that we've spoken to were kind of drinking a bit more as those symptoms started to appear and the hormonal changes happened. Equally, a lot of women that we spoke to also drank less at the time, but they started noticing their kind of perimenopausal symptoms because they started to think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm starting to feel completely different. And it can be a sort of, I don't like to use the word golden moment, but they do that a lot in research. Like it's a moment of change. So it's a moment of reevaluating how you feel about your health as a whole. So people were talking about, well, actually, yeah, I started to do more exercise. I started to think about what I was eating. And also alongside that, I started to change my drinking habits because I noticed I was just feeling a bit more crap each time. Again, I think we need to do more to understand that. What was striking in this research that we did was that people were talking about drinking to cope with a combination of sort of mental health symptoms from menopause, but also kind of physical health symptoms that are brought on around that time that could also be down to other conditions as well. But because they didn't feel that there were any other outlets to support them. So it's like this, and I guess the thing about midlife, and as I say, we are all here in midlife, is that we kind of all grew up and came of age at a time when, alcohol was incredibly freely available.
The 90s.
90s, yeah. I mean,
Britain.
I'm always saying to my students who they're always dressing like the 90s, I'm like, there's some things about the 90s you don't want to bring back, but they love it. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So 90s, binge Britain, all of that stuff around increased products, the sort of alcohol pop market, more marketing to women. Women's drinking became much more in line with men's drinking. It doesn't mean we should drink the same amount. So there's all that kind of stuff that's tied up in it. And then we are in that cohort that is kind of not really changed that drinking behavior until some of us get to midlife and are like, oh, hang on a minute, actually. So it's a heavy drinking cohort coming through, but with fewer avenues for other sources of support. So people kind of get there and think, well, hang on a minute, I've been drinking this way all my life, really. What else is there out there? Now, I think there's some great conversations opening up around menopause, perimenopause, and all of that. Great. But again, I think it maybe just targets certain groups. So it's kind of leaving some people by the wayside. The Davina McCall effect, love a bit of that. I think that's great. But it does kind of, it's kind of this sort of affluent women who have got the time to do other hobbies and be able to explore other ways of coping with all sorts of crap that's going on in their lives, but at the same time, all these perimenopause symptoms as well. So yeah, that sort of cohort effect type thing, I think has left us with this kind of group of midlife who are drinking kind of more than the other age groups. Yeah.
And kind of once again, very clever marketing, right? Because you talked there about Leadette culture in the 90s and the rise of women drinking, keeping up with the guys, the Zoe Balls and so on and so forth. That's very clever now, and obviously following that marketing through with very much the mummy wine culture and that marketing to relax at the end of the day. You've earned this, the gin o'clock fridge magnets or whatever it happens to be. And I think,
home is where the wine is.
Home is where the wine is. And, I guess this isn't really leading to a question. I guess it's just kind of highlighting what's going on there. And equally, it's the drink aware part on the label, which I guess is a lot of people don't understand is actually funded by big alcohol, which I find shocking. And yeah, it just feels like that there's big alcohol behind all of this, and it's a massive hurdle to tackle going forward, really. Yeah. It's a statement rather than a question, but it's just something that's really coming up for me through this conversation. It's just clever that marketing has shifted through the years.
Yeah, and it's had to. I mean, to speak to your kind of drink aware point, the whole like drink responsibly thing that goes alongside the advertising and the labels is a really interesting one, and we've done some research on that, so I find it fascinating. When we were doing a load of research on whether people would respond well to health information on alcohol product labels, we did like an experimental study where we compared the impact of these what we might call ambiguous messages with kind of positively worded health messages, so reduce your risk of cancer, and negatively worded health messages, so cancer gives you, alcohol gives you cancer, that type of thing. And we found that for people who were kind of more closely identified with being a heavier drinker, that the health messages actually led to them saying that they would drink more. So that's one interesting point. So there's something about who's the recipient of the health message that's important and how that message is framed. But we followed that study up with an interview study to kind of look at people's experiences and their perceptions in more detail. And people were very, savvy about this, drink responsibly stuff. They say, oh yeah, I see that, and I just think it's like Gambleware, when the fun stops. I just ignore it, and
which is exactly
said,
the same label, right? Taken off one bottle and turned it so it's Drinkerware or Gambleware.
They've clearly taken gambling, clearly taken what the alcohol industry are doing
100%. Yeah, there's a whole playbook. But the drink responsibly thing. And then we said, well, what does it mean to you to drink responsibly? And I touched on this a bit before, but one woman said to me, well, it just means stop before you hit the floor. I was like,
it's subjective, isn't it? It's different for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, now this is a really important point that I think that we need to reflect on a lot, that these types of messages allow us to see ourselves on the right side of an imaginary line between being a good, responsible drinker and being a bad drinker who's an alcoholic. And if we can see ourselves as individuals as on this side, the good side of the line, then we don't need to pay attention to any health messaging, regardless of how we frame it or how carefully we design the messages or how much the NHS tells us or what you guys are saying or anything at all, because we're responsible and in that ambiguous way. Now we can then look at other people and say, well, these people are not responsible. So that woman down there, she's got all those bottles in her recycling bin. I'm not like that. Or that person on the street, that it's that negative image of what it means to be someone who's a dependent drinker, or the term alcoholic, which we can come back to. So if we continue with those messages, then we're sort of allowing people to kind of evaluate their behavior in a very positive light. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I think we need to evaluate ourselves in a positive light just to get through the day. But we're reinforcing that idea of it being a binary. We're sort of saying, well, the other thing is, if you do suddenly feel like you do want a bit of help or you'd like to change your behavior, then it can feel really, really shameful and really stigmatizing, because you can say, oh, hang on a minute, I'm not like those people. I'm this person, but I am struggling a bit, and it can stop people from coming forward to seek help. It's a huge thing.
Yeah. I hear that hugely in people I'm coaching, in the early conversations that we have, is that little justification. Well, I'm not drinking in the morning, or I'm not on a park bench, I'm not pouring vodka on my cornflakes 9 a.m. and there's, I guess, that drink responsibly. There is, like you say, it's that grey line, isn't it? Because there will always be someone that you will deem that drinks less responsibly than you at whatever level you are. And ultimately, the message we're trying to get across is if alcohol becomes a problem for you personally, then that's when we should be addressing it, because it's a sliding scale, but it just comes back to that awareness, because otherwise it's just a sliding scale, and where do we sit on it?
Mm-hmm. You used the word binary there earlier, Emma, and I think that's the real key thing, isn't it? Even virtually everyone that I speak to about what I do and helping people change their relationship with alcohol, the vast majority of people have this assumption that you're either an alcoholic or everything's fine. And we don't, we've become very good as society as seeing mental health as being on a spectrum, but we don't look at alcohol broadly in that way. Whereas, obviously the medical profession don't really use the term alcoholic anymore. It's alcohol use disorder, which takes away that binary way of looking at it and makes it more of a sliding scale that, even if you're drinking a small amount, you're somewhere on that scale. And if you're drinking a bit more, you're a bit further along on that scale. But I just don't think the vast majority of people look at it that way. They're like, well, why would I stop drinking unless I was an alcoholic? But it's just not like that.
No, and again, I think it just speaks particularly to kind of an age group that we're doing a lot of research on in midlife, about that life story that involves alcohol, like all your good moments and all your crap moments involved alcohol. All your celebrations, all your commiserations involved alcohol. So hang on a minute, how can I suddenly start be questioning that thing that's been walking alongside me my whole life? You can start to feel like maybe you're the problem. And that's why these kind of I think particularly in the 10-year health plan as well, these kind of messages around who it is that needs to change. For example, again, I looked at the 10-year health plan and it says something like it's always like the vast majority of people drink in moderation. But moderation, what does that mean? It's like, oh, well, if I'm not in that vast majority, what's wrong with me? And it just exacerbates that already existing shame. Particularly, and not just for women, but particularly for women, there's a lot of shame around alcohol consumption, particularly in certain cultures. It's hidden drinking. It's more likely to be at home than out kind of in a pub environment, and it just really like contributes to that spiral of feeling like it's me that's the problem because everybody else is drinking responsibly. Everybody else is fine.
One of the terms that we hear so much is "I don't have an off switch." This idea that once I've had one drink, I can't put it down. And I think so many people think that that's just them. And I certainly was like that. I thought, oh, why is it just me that I just can't stop after one? But the reality is that a lot of people, maybe even the majority of people have that response to alcohol because it's addictive and, it switches off your prefrontal cortex. So, your logic and your reasoning is offline. So it's this idea of I'm just going to go out for one, it never happens. You go to the pub, you're like, oh god, what the hell, I'll have another one. And that because the landscape in your mind has changed after alcohol's in your system. But people beat themselves up about, oh, it's just me. And it's kind of like you said, it's presented to us as everybody else is fully in control and having a wonderful time, and it's just me that doesn't have an off switch. And it's just not like that for a lot of people. You spoke a little bit earlier, Emma, about you just touched upon it there about the research you've been doing about the barriers to alcohol reduction in midlife men. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, gladly. So as I've sort of hinted at quite a lot in this conversation, we've done a big amount of work looking at midlife women and alcohol, menopause, developing support tools and all of those things. And that work's been absolutely wonderful. But of course, we're missing kind of looking at another part of the population who actually do drink more. So midlife men drink much more than women. I think the statistic is 1 in 3 midlife men are drinking above what we determine as our low risk limits of 14 units a week, where it's 1 in 5 women. And always is the case that on average that alcohol consumption in men has been higher. So we really wanted to do a similar study looking to see if we could develop relevant support tools that would help midlife men. And obviously there are completely different drinking motives, different kind of things going on. So we've started in the last kind of 6 months trying to build that research area. There's very little research on midlife drinking in general. There is a bit more now on women. We've done some of it, and there's some people in Australia doing it. But there's also not that much on midlife men either. A lot of the research focuses on younger adults, for all sorts of reasons. But yeah, so what we've decided to do is we've been running online focus groups with groups of men aged between 40 and 65. And we've just been asking them in general just to talk about their views on what kind of are the main reasons why they drink or other guys like them. We're not kind of asking people necessarily to focus just on their own drinking. And then to kind of come up in a discussion group with the other people in the group, like what sort of things might be supportive for people who'd like to cut down. And I think we've done 5 groups now, and it's been absolutely fantastic. So in some ways, there's been some really similar things coming out. Like we talked about the culture, we talked about the cohort effect. But with the men that we've spoken to, there's all sorts of other challenges going on. And some of that's around mental health. And I think probably chiming with other research that's going on and other discussions that are being had around men's mental health is that there has been a bit of a lack of focus, particularly around kind of supporting midlife men who are dealing with a range of different mental health conditions. And again, speaking to the kind of cultural shift and the way that kind of, as I say, we've all grown up with alcohol, that's been the coping tool. So men have told us that, they didn't know what else. They didn't basically have many other avenues for either socializing with friends or kind of letting go of a stressful situations. And particularly, I think this is possibly where we are seeing a bit more of a change, is in the, as you said before, in more open discussions around mental health happening with younger people. But we never used to talk about those things, did we, when we were in the 90s, cracking on with the alcohol pops and whatever else. So men have been incredibly open with us in talking about some of the challenges and some of the things that have helped. Now, quite a few did talk about the rise of alcohol-free products as being really beneficial, but some people were still facing challenges with not really knowing what to say to their mates if they didn't want to drink on a night out. Like, you know, my husband's got two best friends, and every time they go out, they get absolutely annihilated, and they won't mind me saying that at all because I talk about it to them quite a lot. But that's just their way of bonding.
Yeah.
And they say, well, and I say, well, you could go and do this, and they just laugh at me. We don't want to go and, you know, go and sit down and do a painting class or something. You know, they're just like, you know, that's their way of letting off steam, and they don't necessarily want to you know, want to let on to friends. Of the men in our studies have been saying they don't want to let on to their mates that they're struggling with things, because they've always felt like, oh, they've always looked like they've kept it together, or it's been part of their identity that they're the one that can handle the most drink in their group and things like that. So yeah, they've been giving us some absolutely fantastic ideas about how to explore this topic more broadly speaking, to go out and, you know, do some bigger studies on larger groups of men to kind of look at some of the really important factors that we should be focusing on, and also helping us to develop some kind of really good support tools that can help people wherever they are in different stages, but also that sort of breaking that kind of stigma and breaking those barriers about saying actually it's okay to talk about the fact that you might want to drink a bit less. And I think stuff that you guys are doing and lots of other people in the space of opening up those conversations is really helpful. But, you know, there's certain groups that are quite resistant to that. So it's how do you open up these conversations with people that are resistant? So yeah, we're still running a few more focus groups. So if anyone who's listening would like to take part, we'd love to hear a range of different views. So I guess you can pass on my contact details in your podcast notes. But yeah, we absolutely love to hear from people, and they can get in touch and just give us their ideas and their views and experiences, and all of that will be really valuable in helping us to support other people who'd like to make changes. And then next year we'll move forward with that work and look at running a bigger study and applying for some funding to do it. And I think there is the sort of, you know, the movement now within the research funding sphere to say, yeah, we do need to do some more stuff here. So hopefully we'll be able to move on with that research.
Yeah. It's so inherent in our behavior, isn't it? Particularly as men. It's because you're right, we do it from 15 years, maybe call it 18 then for argument's sake. But you know, before you get to midlife, you've probably done it for at least 2 decades. And it's what you know, and you can't envisage, you don't know what you don't know. And, you know, you're right. I'm sure Steve will agree. Probably the thing that comes up more, the reason why people say they drink or they need to drink is the social aspect, you know, followed maybe by stress relief. But if you've never socialized alcohol-free with a group of mates, you can't envisage what it would be like. But it does come down to, you know, a coaching term, which is a limiting belief, where you tell yourself, boy, that's how it is. But actually you haven't tried it. And when you do try it, it's really not what you think it is. And it can maybe take 1 or 2 goes to kind of sort of readjust. But, you know, I've posted about this before in the past. I'm a massive live sport fan. I've been, you know, my best mates and I've been to live sport, football and rugby for 25 years. And that was always involved around 10 hours of drinking. Did it a couple of times without drinking. I was like, oh, you know what? This isn't so bad. Actually, it's not really different at all. I was at Twickenham a couple of weeks ago with my best mate. We've been over 20 times to Twickenham and we didn't drink the last 2 occasions. Had a great time. It's no different. But if you'd said that to me beforehand, in fact, you know, I've spoken about this in the pod before. The one thing that stopped me going alcohol free for a long time was that fear of, well, how's sport going to work? It's just not going to work without alcohol. How am I going to do that? Well, it's not going to work until I tried it. And I realized, you know what, I had a great time. There's a whole load of benefits to doing it. It's not exactly the same. It's a little bit different, but it's no better or no worse.
Just that rewiring, isn't it? It's that getting used to it.
Completely.
It's the, you know, and unfortunately that's the battle, right? That's the, like you often say, James, on the pod, is like when you're inside the jar, you can't read the label. So it takes, you know, you can't really, it's that lived experience of doing it. For me, it's the same. It was the same thing. You know, it's that the pub is where we socialize, you know, but you can socialize in a pub. You just can have something different. It doesn't have to, you know, and you probably in time you socialize more. But yeah, sports, the other one, live music, all of these things that we just so associate as having a drink. And it's just that changes. It's those rewiring. It's that little bit of giving it a go and then give it a go again. And then it gets that little bit easier.
Yeah, we often talk to people about kind of we think about identity as a key driver of health behaviours across the board. So, you know, obviously with doing exercise, you can see yourself as not a sporty person, so you don't feel like you fit in. But it's the same with changing your drinking behaviours. It's like I don't see yourself as someone who is a non-drinker. Maybe you feel a bit negative about non-drinkers more subconsciously, or just because of like that, you know, that whole cultural thing, or you see yourself as someone who's the life and soul of the party, or whatever your kind of little thing is that your kind of role within a group. And then you worry, like, what if I can't fulfill that role for my group of friends, and what will they think of me? And again, it's just about, like you say, that trying it out and seeing, and then that identity change does take a long time.
But for a lot of people, that's kind of part of life, because you know, your identity that you build up, that you've just described there, maybe I'm life is soul of the party, I'm last to bed, you know, I can hold my beer and all that kind of thing. A lot of that is established in, you know, in our youth, in our 20s, and maybe into our 30s. But when you're getting to your 50s, do you have to be that person for your entire life, or do you evolve as a person and you become something else, and you evolve your identity? And that's what I think why it's so becoming. You know, Steve and I work predominantly with people in midlife, and see this time and time again. People get to 40 and they start questioning, is it still the same now? And there's a really famous book actually called The Second Mountain. You might have heard of it, which is all about, you climb 2 mountains in life. And the first one is all about career and family. And then you kind of get to that mountain you get to the top of that mountain around about your 40s. And you're like, what now? What do I do now? Do I just keep scaling because I've already scaled it? You know, so then you start climbing a different mountain, which is about a second half of your life. And I just think and that for a lot of people, alcohol comes into that, and it's becoming, some people don't want to become a different person with a different identity, but some do. And when I got to 40, I definitely was like, yeah, I loved that. I had a brilliant time for 20 years, but I just want to do something a bit different now. It's not congruent with who I am anymore. And yeah, that challenging your identity is quite a big thing, but not a bad thing.
No, I completely agree. I mean, yeah, in terms of like my own drinking behavior, like as I say, I mean, I was growing up in the 90s, I was, you know, drinking absolutely loads. And I think over time, and it is that shift towards midlife, that's the thing that's made me sort of question all of my kind of health behaviors really, and start thinking, well, actually, do these things still serve me? And what is it that I want for the next part of my life? Like, and then also like working in the field, it's kind of an interesting one. It's like, we actually had an event with alcohol researchers. They all came to Brookes and we were talking about research all day, but we had a specific session in the afternoon of like, well, how do you navigate alcohol consumption as an alcohol researcher? What are your beliefs and what are your behaviors, and how do you feel when the two don't match up? So we had a really like lovely open conversation, obviously not recorded and shared, but about people working in the field. And often we do work in the field of research because we feel passionate about it for some reason, you know, and there are a lot of kind of personal reasons for me around probably why I've ended up in this particular field, but people were really open about it and saying, yeah, you know, sometimes I feel like I've messed up because I know all the evidence, but yet my behavior is still not kind of what I thought it should be. And we were saying, well, yeah, it's really difficult to change your behavior as an individual in a society which is so alcoholic, which is the word that we like to use. So it's almost like, you know, you kind of go on a journey through the research and then you come out the other end and you kind of change your views and you change your behaviors as a result. But then you beat yourself up a bit more if you don't always act in line with your behaviors. So it's quite an interesting one. But I think in terms of identity, I think that like you say, it's that shifting point. And then it's like I say, I'm not anti-drinking. I do drink. But I definitely have noticed a change in how I feel about it and how I feel just about the fact that it's just such a, you know, a multi-million industry, and it's kind of, you know, do you want to be supporting that as well as thinking about what it's doing to your health as well, if you see what I mean? It's like, yeah, you can get pleasure from all sorts of things, and there are definitely occasions where I think, yeah, I've really enjoyed a drink in that situation, But in terms of trying to, like, not drink as much as I did when I was younger, I kind of think, well, actually, there are other things that serve me better in my life now.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
It's it's a fascinating debate. It comes down to education, I guess, a bit, doesn't it, as well? Because it's knowledge. The more the more you learn about something, and the more you understand it, it kind of takes the shine off it. When you're just kind of just drinking blindly without really knowing, we started this episode talking about cancer. When you have that education, you know these things, and you understand a bit more about what's happening, neurologically, it kind of makes you look at it a little bit differently.
I think you've got to be open to it, though. I think you've got to be in a place where you're open to finding out that information. Now, that could be because of a life transition or a change, like a cancer diagnosis or perimenopause or something, some change in your circumstances. But I think you've got to be open to it, because if you open to the change, then you'll seek the information. Yet you'll find your sober communities like you guys, and there's loads of other amazing sober communities out there that are really growing to make you feel like you're part of something, or you'll seek out stuff. But I think there's a lot of people who are kind of on the fence a bit, and kind of, even if the information was there on the products, or there's a bit more of a campaign going on more widely in public health, I think people would still be like, it's not for me still. So I think you got to get there. And once you get there, you're there, but it's like, how do we sort of support people who might benefit from drinking less, who aren't there, I think is the question for my research anyway.
Yeah. And I think it's that if it's there, they can look when they're ready. Do you know what I mean? And now when they're looking, maybe they're just not getting the right information.
I absolutely agree. And I hope that we're going to do something about that in the research that we're doing.
Amazing.
I think that probably brings us to a natural conclusion. Emma, this has been, I've thoroughly enjoyed this hour of speaking to you. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Yeah.
You mentioned there about linking to some of your research, and we'll definitely put that in the show notes. I've had a look through some of your research paper, and there's some absolutely fascinating stuff there. We'll just thank you for doing that research. If other people want to actually have a look at some of that information, some of the work that you've done, is there anywhere where they can go and find out a bit more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you my profile page for the university that's got all the information about the studies. But if people want to get in touch and talk about this type of thing, or take part in any studies, I'm very happy to connect with them on LinkedIn, or they can send me an email. So
do we count?
Of course. Do you know what? I was just thinking, you guys would be brilliant. Yeah.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
You count us
in. If you get you two together and a friend, that'd be great. We've got a wonderful one. Well, I think all views are important here, so you can bring your views, and that'll be fantastic. But anyone else that wants to get involved, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Amazing.
Pod exclusive. You heard it here
first. Amazing.
Great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Emma.
Have a wonderful day, and keep in touch.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.